Legends whisper that this library remembers every soul who dares to enter. Tonight, its endless shelves stir in silence, watching, waiting. One wrong step, one book opened, and the secrets it holds may never let you leave the same. There are places in this world that do not belong to geography. They do not appear on maps, and they do not age like ordinary buildings. They do not forget. Some say this library was built centuries ago. Others insist it has always existed. But the strange part is not its age. The strange part is that every person who enters leaves with the feeling that something inside has recognized them. Not welcomed them, recognized them. And sometimes, when the doors close and the last footstep fades, a new book appears on a shelf that was empty before. Daniel entered the library one quiet autumn afternoon, unaware that it had already been waiting for him. He did not believe in fate or destiny. He believed in routine and coincidence. But when his eyes fell on the girl seated beneath the tall window, golden sunlight spilling around her like silent guardians, something shifted. She was reading, not distractedly, not casually, but as if the world beyond the page did not exist. Her stillness pulled his gaze, and for the first time, Daniel felt the inexplicable weight of being observed by the world itself. Their first words were ordinary. A question about a misplaced book. A polite exchange. Nothing dramatic. And yet, as they spoke, the old clock above the central arch ticked louder than usual. Both noticed it. Neither mentioned it. That single, louder tick marked the beginning of something neither could understand yet. Their visits continued. Not planned, not discussed, simply consistent. In the library's quiet embrace, Daniel and Emma's connection grew. Not through confessions or declarations, but through shared silence. They observed the same details, paused on the same sentences, lingered in the same light. Once during a bitter winter, the heaters failed, and the library grew cold. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she turned a page. Without a word, Daniel slid his chair closer, close enough to share warmth, far enough to maintain respect. She did not acknowledge it. She did not move away. That was how their bond existed. Unannounced, undeniable, quiet. Life eventually carried them elsewhere. Career opportunities, a move to a new city, a new home with unfamiliar streets and empty rooms. They married quietly, with certainty rather than ceremony, and settled into a life that was orderly and predictable. But in the quiet evenings, Daniel sometimes whispered, "Do you ever feel like we left something unfinished?" Emma would pause before replying, "Yes." And so, 2 years later, they returned. Not because they needed to, but because something pulled them back, a thread of inevitability they could not name. The library doors opened with the same deep wooden sigh they remembered from years ago. Dust floated in golden shafts of sunlight, catching on the air like particles of memory. Shelves stretched high above them, silent and solemn, as if standing guard over secrets too precious to speak aloud. And at the desk, the librarian waited. He had not changed. Not a line on his face, not a silver strand in his hair. Time had passed, but it had no claim over him. Emma noticed first, her voice a barely audible whisper. "He hasn't aged a bit." Daniel nodded, a chill crawling along his spine. "Some people belong to places," he said softly, "not to years." They parted silently, each moving toward opposite shelves. For old time's sake, they picked books at random, as if nothing unusual might happen. Emma opened hers first. Her breath caught. The pages did not contain the subject she had chosen. Instead, they told the story of that very first day in this library, the day she had first noticed Daniel. Every word, every thought, every subtle observation she had thought private was written there, vivid and exact. At the same moment, Daniel frowned at his own book. It described him entering the library, noticing Emma beneath the golden light, reading with quiet concentration. The page captured his unspoken thoughts, the little tremors in his heart he had never admitted. Word for word, memory for memory, their earliest encounters were preserved. They exchanged books, horror and wonder in their eyes. The story of their first smile, the first small laugh, The first unspoken acknowledgement. Every detail they had ever shared, not in words, but in attention and thought, was there meticulously chronicled. And yet, the final chapter froze them in fear. The chapter describing their departure from the library, their life apart, and their eventual return ended with a blank page. The silence in the library deepened. Not ordinary silence. This was the kind that watched, that waited, that demanded attention. The clock's hands hung still above them. Even the faint rustle of dust seemed suspended. Then, slowly, ink began to surface on the empty page. Not dripping, not spilling, but emerging from the fibers themselves, as if the book were alive. One word formed first: continue. Daniel's hand shook slightly as he reached for a pencil. It was not command. It was invitation. He looked at Emma. She met his gaze with a quiet certainty. He wrote 4 simple words: "We are not finished." The page absorbed the sentence. Then, like responding to courage, began to write again. The ink formed words of blessing, not prediction. Some stories are written by time. Some are written by choice. Yours continues. The air seemed lighter now, yet heavier too, like a world exhaling after holding its breath for centuries. From the desk, the librarian observed silently. Not a smile, not judgment, just patient, eternal watchfulness. Daniel approached him and asked, "Who writes these books?" The librarian's eyes reflected no light. "Most people close their books too early," he said quietly. And when Emma asked, "And if they don't?" he looked past them toward the farthest shelves. "Then they are remembered." Then he returned to his desk, and the conversation was over. As they placed the books back on the shelf, Daniel noticed something new. The titles had changed. Daniel and Emma, Volume 1. Beside it, an empty space. Reserved. No explanation. Just waiting. They stepped outside, and the golden light did not merely fall upon them. It followed. Behind the closed doors, a book shifted on a high shelf, one that no ladder could reach. Its cover bore a date, 5 years before Daniel and Emma had ever met. Its title read, "First Encounter Approved." Beneath it, a single signature, the librarian's name, inked in 1872. And somewhere beyond the ordinary, the library waited again, patient, eternal, alive. Daniel and Emma stood for a moment outside the shelves, holding the books close as though they could absorb the weight of what they had just discovered. The golden light spilled across the floor, warm yet unreal, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into infinity. Silence clung to the library like a living presence, and in that quiet, a single, unsettling thought whispered between them. Was this real, or were they inside some impossibly elaborate memory? They returned to the desk. The librarian's shadow fell at an impossible angle, yet he did not move. When Daniel asked again, "Who writes these books?" the librarian's gaze went past them, toward a distant shelf. He did not answer, and yet the air seemed to hum with understanding. Time here was measured not in hours or years, but in choices. Each book, each page, was a record of courage and attention, of moments noticed or ignored, of lives quietly shaped by the unseen. They walked slowly to the door. With each step, the library seemed to inhale, then exhale, as if acknowledging their decision to leave or remain. Daniel glanced back at the towering shelves and the silent librarian. Emma followed his gaze. In that glance, neither needed words. They understood that leaving did not erase the library's work. Their story was recorded. Their choices, their courage, their subtle bond, immortalized in ink and memory. As the doors swung closed, a faint sound reached them, the soft rustle of pages on a distant shelf, though no one else was there. From the corner of Daniel's eye, he thought he saw a book shift, glowing faintly, almost imperceptibly, as though the library itself was breathing. A chill ran through his spine, and Emma's hand found his, small and steady, a tether against the impossible. And then, just as the sunlight hit the threshold, Daniel noticed something that made his blood freeze. On the highest shelf, a blank book had moved slightly, revealing a title, Tomorrow's Encounter. No names, no date, Just an empty page. The library waited, patient, eternal, asking questions they did not yet have the courage to answer. Daniel squeezed Emma's hand. The wordless question hung in the air. Will they return? Will they continue? He could not answer. She could not. And yet, in that unspoken pause, they understood. Some stories are not written once. Some stories are chosen again and again, in the quiet acts of courage and attention that most people overlook. They stepped outside fully into the golden light, the library doors closing behind them with the same measured sigh as when they had first entered. For a heartbeat, the world seemed ordinary again. But as they walked into the streets, Daniel's eyes flicked to the corner where the building had stood. It shimmered, almost unreal, as if it had never been entirely part of this world. And somewhere inside, a page turned. Somewhere beyond the ordinary, a story continued. Weeks passed, but Daniel and Emma could not forget the library. Sometimes in quiet moments, they imagined the shelves moving silently, books whispering in the golden dust of memory. One evening, as twilight spilled across the city streets, a faint glow appeared in a high window, as if the library itself were breathing. Patient, eternal. Somewhere inside, a new book shifted, empty pages trembling with possibility. It was waiting for another hand, another choice, another story to begin. And somewhere, quietly, the librarian observed, timeless and unyielding, knowing that some stories are never truly finished. And so, dear friends, remember this. Some places do not merely exist. They wait, they watch, they record, and somewhere beyond the ordinary, endless stories lie in the shadows, each one ready for those brave enough to step inside. If this story stirred your curiosity, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and step further into the world beyond the ordinary.